I'm going to whiz through the intro bit because I think most people know what it is that I do, and I'll get straight into the subject today. I thought I would concentrate on hoarding and what we know about hoarding. So I'm a professional declutterer, and there's all sorts of titles that are being bandied around now. I was in the paper has been called the Queen of Stuff. There's lots of people setting up now calling themselves simplicity coaches. You know, it is quite a growing profession, basically. But with all sorts of different titles. I'm quite a hands-on, practical, in people's homes, helping them when they've become overwhelmed. That's what we do. I come from a background where I've got a degree in psychology and counselling and a postgrad in organisation and change. And I spent 12 years as a sort of business manager across local government. So that helps in a way because I'm familiar with audit and evaluation for Devon County Council and other housing providers. I know what they're trying to achieve a little, so it gives a good insight. And I've been set up as a self-employed declutterer since 2013. Longest I've ever held a position, because I was always chopping and changing jobs as a project manager in local government. But yeah, I've stuck at this because I love it so much. Spent 8 years as an APDO member. APDO is the Association of Professional Declutterers and Organisers UK. I'm not an APDO member anymore, but I was for the first 8 years that I was set up. And I was their sort of national expert in hoarding. Because I'd done such a lot of work with people whose homes were dangerously full, in all the training that they did for new professional organisers, of which there's about 450 now professionally registered organisers across the UK. They brought me in to do the bits on hoarding at the time. There's now a sort of whole branch for hoarding. It's really growing. Now there's quite a number of people who do that as a specific area. So for example, of the 450 people in APDO, quite a lot of them stage homes for sale, do paperwork organising, that sort of thing. And only a small percentage will be doing sort of hoarding work where people's homes are dangerously full. I was also on the Declutter Hub podcast, which has, I understand, over 5,000 downloads internationally, and that subject was hoarding. And recently I've been involved in a Plymouth University project on interventions. I also, as a small aside, do downsizing work. So I work for the Senior Move Partnership. So I was, like I said the other day, moving somebody in who was 100 years old. So I do a lot of moving people in and downsizing seniors. So it's not just all hoarding crisis work. I do an awful lot of planning the logistics for people who are downsizing. There's 3 of us in the team. We're jabbed twice, as you say, all jabbed up twice, as earlier say, we've been done twice. And we cover quite a broad area, but pretty much up towards Oakhampton, across to Tiverton, down towards Lyme Regis and Taunton. So that sort of catchment area we work in, within a sort of 50 to 60 mile radius of Exmouth. Quite a good percentage of our work is funded, and I'll fly through this and we'll get into the hoarding bit, because I do want you to do an activity, if that's all right, thinking about our own belongings and our relationship to them. So plenty of work with social services and housing providers. We do get funded by family members through quarter protection, people's personal budgets, and we do get a mixture of short-term projects. So when homes require modernisation or somebody needs hospital equipment going into their bed, and that's when people find out how full their homes are at that stage. And then sometimes we'll be allowed to go in funded potentially for a sort of 4 to 8 week sessions with people, and then sometimes we're involved sort of more midterm. So we have a good number of people now who see us monthly to carry on with that independent living. There might be people with learning difficulties, autism, bipolar, PTSD. We get a whole number of people who, for a variety of reasons, find it difficult to maintain their homes, and they want somebody to help declutter and organise their homes, as well as do the normal sort of standard tidying up, if you like. So we're very much involved in their home in the midterm. So I don't know if any of you have ever seen the clutter rating scale, but this is what I use. I mean, I don't use it a lot, but I use it with the public sector organisations. So I'll get a phone call from a social worker or an occupational therapist or someone similar, or even a concerned family member who'll say it's really full in there. And we try and get a sort of common language about how full is full. And so understanding where people are on the clutter rating scale. I don't like the title. It's American organisation, the Organisation for Chronic Disorganisation. That's what it stands for, OCD, in this particular one. They've got this pictorial resource that people can use. It's online. They've got a representation of a living room, kitchen and a bedroom, and I tend to use the bedroom one because that's the one where I'm usually pretty interested to know whether they're sleeping in their own bed. And there's a lot of people who don't sleep in their own bed because their bedrooms are so full. So 1 to 3 is a usual teenager's room, apparently. This is what I'm told. I've got this to look forward to. Quite a lot of the clients that we work with who are overwhelmed stage, it's a 5+. If it's a 9 across the property, it's often too full for us to start doing work. It depends how safe it is to start pulling things out, categorising them and making decisions. And I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. Bearing in mind that we go into these spaces with the householder, we don't go in as clearance. We're going to be sorting all of those belongings, of which they will likely be in a mixed state. So 6 in this pictorial reference, you can see newspapers are starting to pile up, and it looks like there's washing machine, a fridge, something's gone into the bedroom. So at that stage, where things are coming into a room that don't belong in a room, we're quite used to working with all sorts of things being stockpiled in a room. But it is helpful because it helps with the evaluation with public sector organisations to say, okay, it's a 6, and we're going to try and get it down to a 3 and regulated for that person. So it just helps us have that common language between organisations. And also, like I say, on the phone when we're just trying to get a sense of it. We don't always get it right. I sometimes been told it's a 5 and I've gone in and it's a 9, but we're just trying to get a lot of agencies to use this as a tool to help, because everyone's different ideas of what full means. When we're using the clutter rating scale, there's all sorts of things that it doesn't tell us that I like to know. I can either pick this up in the first visit or in a phone call. So obviously, the first question I want to know is it a 5 or a 6 throughout all the key function rooms, so kitchen, living room, bedroom, or is it just one spare room where everything's sort of gathered? We get a lot of private calls from people who say, I've got a really full spare room, I've got guests coming to visit, or we're trying for a baby, or we want to turn it into a home office and it's chocker in there. That's fine, we can do that, that's no trouble. That's not hoarding, that's just cramming everything into a room. There might be some psychological attachment to things, we can work with that. But of course, if it's across all rooms, it makes it more logistically challenging to work in. We want to know as well whether the person can walk between rooms without obstacles. Is it as full on the stairs? Is it as full in the upper hallway, and that sort of thing? We want to know whether the boiler's been switched off by the landlord and the electrical points, if they're not accessible and they're overdue their electrical checks. Those things are important to us as well. I mean, the thing I don't tend to ask anymore is the loft full? Because if they're in council or, you know, sort of supported housing, the insurance is invalid for the housing provider. But if it's a full home, the chances are there's something in the loft. But if there's modernisation projects, we want to know if it's full in the loft. Obviously, what is being stockpiled is really important for us to know, because usually it's the standard fare. 90% of the situations we go in, it's clothes, it's DVDs, it's paperwork, it's magazines, it's hobby crafts, it's all the usual thing, the amount of wool I see. There's all sorts of the normal things that you would bring into your home, and then now and again it's unusual things. So I always cite the case of Mr. W, who we in September would have been working with for 3 years. and we're very lucky to be able to have done so. When I first met him, we couldn't open the door. There was a mattress against the door, and he had to be on day release from the local psychiatric hospital to work with us. And he came out with his support worker, and he was very nervous. And we opened the door, and the home was entirely filled with musical instruments. It was a new one, and you couldn't put your foot on the floor. And the task we had was to make it safe for him to be discharged home from hospital. He was making good recovery, but it just wasn't safe for him to be home. He managed to get a shared project funding at the time from the fire service. They don't fund anymore, but from the housing provider. And then we've got funding from Court of Protection, which has been really great. He allowed us to have a skip. We donated so many instruments to hospice care, helped him sell a cello, really got involved. And the most satisfying moment of going into his house and him making a cup of coffee. And he's been maintaining it with Rachel, who works for me. And yeah, been able to stand in his kitchen. He played us a little tune on his guitar. Last week we extracted, not we, but we were facilitating 3 full loads of waste from his back garden. And when we first met him, there was no way he was going to touch the back garden. So he's come a long way, really proud of him. But sometimes when we turn up, there's different things that we have to manage. And of course, some things are higher risk than others in what's been stockpiled. And of course, if it's a 9 throughout, and I have to say, across our locality, and I'll be cheery and we'll do our nice activity in a minute, but there are people who in their entire home have enough space to just about lie down. And maybe they can't even lie down, they can go into an armchair. And there is not much else other than the loo available to them. It's really shocking. But if it's a 9 throughout, what we're looking at is somebody moving out temporarily, us coming back with them, doing the work, because it would be unsafe to start pulling things out while they're in too close proximity. We're also looking at good weather to potentially bring things outside. But it's often gone too far if it's a 9 throughout. We also want to know what they want to achieve. And of course, the big one, and this is what we're going to look at very quickly, is what's their psychological attachment. So no matter how full it is, what makes the difference in our work is how attached the person is to their belongings, how frightened they're going to be about stuff, their belongings being touched. I won't go into this one too much detail because, like I said, I want to get into the activity, but there are lots of reasons why people stockpile and hoard. We see a lot of people who have always been on a low income and they stockpile because something might be useful, you know, they've paid money for it. All of us can kind of recognize those tendencies, but they've not sorted belongings for 20 years. And that really does mean that things are full in their home. Long-term depression and self-neglect, there's just no point in looking after yourself, no point putting out the recycling, no point processing the rubbish. You don't deserve a good home. Depression can really slow everything down and make little point in even making your bed. So we see that a lot with clients when they're coming out of what's been a long-term depression. We see a lot of people with severe anxiety, and I'll talk about hoarding disorder in a moment, where they're really frightened about making the wrong decision with their belonging, really frightened that they will put something out and then regret it. And that's a struggle for people, and we try and work with that and find easier decisions they can make first and get practiced and so on. We see people who have got high expectations for themselves, so they might be presented with this challenge in front of them here, which is overwhelming. It's a mixture of things. There was newspapers underneath that and paperwork at the base. And they will only start if they can get it finished to the nth degree, you know, their bed all pristine, the cupboards all pristine. They don't see any point just chipping away at it. That there's, you know, in their brains, it's saying, oh, you know, unless it's done perfectly, it's not even worth starting. And that's challenging because there's no way you can do that in one go. Unless there's 2 or 3 of you and they're really willing to make decisions rapidly, and very rarely is that the case. We meet people with cognitive disorders where they've got to have things out. You've got to be able to see it. in order to know it's there. That's challenging, especially with things like dementia and memory issues. Cupboards are pretty much empty, but everything is out. So there's ways in which we have to work in terms of understanding how people can remember things. Obviously, we see a lot of people who shop a lot, who get the self-soothing of shopping and buying online, or it's even worse now because you don't get the same dopamine hit from pressing buy now as you do going to the till in a shop. But unopened things in carrier bags, 50 or 60 of those, potentially in debt because of it, not even enjoyed the belonging. It's been a compulsive process. And this is not just, you know, I've got a dress I've worn, I haven't worn in my cupboard. I haven't actually, but I've got one I've got worn once. But, you know, we can make mistakes with purchases. This is a compulsive habit of purchasing things. And there are all sorts of psychological conditions that make people, they find it difficult to control that impulsivity of buying things. And of course, once it gets to a certain level, it's so overwhelming that when we meet people who've got physical disabilities, so the project we were due to finish today, 2 people, one can't see properly, can hardly see at all, the other one has trouble moving around, sort of middle-aged, but it's become overwhelming. Once it's got to that stage, you do need help in starting to move things around. And of course, the biggie that is hoarding disorder. So there are all sorts of reasons that people stockpile, but hoarding disorder is really serious. And I've mentioned Mr. W already, and I'll mention Mrs. B in a moment. So just so you know, this is an interesting thing. Hoarding disorder is a medical condition. So there are people with really severe issues with holding on to belongings. I don't know a single person who's yet been diagnosed with hoarding disorder across Devon in my work, but it's been there since 2013 as a mental health condition. We still get a lot of mental health practitioners and social workers who believe that when people can't sleep in their own beds and access to their kitchen, that it's a lifestyle choice. And let me be honest, there are all sorts of reasons why people's homes are full. But for some people, it's a genuine mental health condition and they are frightened of touching their stuff. So stockpiling items of little value, restricted space, so limited function in the home. This is what it says in the manual. Distress in day-to-day life, that means the adjustments that people are making, the climbing over, the not being able to get to things easily, the adjustments people are making, not the fact that they look distressed about their home. And of course, the absolute fear in things being moved. When I'm on the phone to somebody, the sort of things that I'm looking for are compulsive behaviours that cannot be challenged, if you know what I mean. Then there's no flexibility there in acquiring and failing to discard. So the one I always cite is a lady called me up. She's got lots of newspapers everywhere, no heating, wants trades to come in, but is quite embarrassed. Buys 3 or 4 newspapers every week without fail. Doesn't look at them, puts them in a pile, won't get rid of them because she needs to look through all of them and also shake them out in case she accidentally slips something in them. And then she'd like to pass them to a neighbour first to get the good value out of them before they go anywhere. So there's loads of barriers to things going out of the home. So that's the sort of thing I'm looking for in terms of those behaviours. I'm also looking to see whether basic functions have been blocked. Basically, the kitchen's unavailable. Usually the bath is the first to go because it's a great storage space, the bath. And they can be quite challenging people to support because, as I always say, none of us are at our best when we're frightened, yeah? When I was on a cable car at Greenwich, and a family came in with 2 lively girls, and my hands were already perspiring because I'm not good with heights or things that wobble a little bit, and they started being quite lively, and I thought, if they start jumping up and down, I'm not in control myself, I'm going to shout. I'm going to get really, because I was frightened. And I try and remember that when people are anxious in their homes, that's what they're feeling. The scale of hoarding disorder, and then we'll do this activity. About 1 million people across the UK have got this disorder. That's what they estimate. So that's 15,000 people in the Devon area are absolutely frightened of moving their stuff. And their houses may be really full. It might be mitigated by somebody else, but they could be really full. Only 5% known to support agencies, and far more common than other more well-known conditions. And guess what? Sometimes hoarding tendencies go with these other mental health difficulties. So it's a huge issue. Right, I'm going to skip over that one. And all sorts of risks to people if their homes are really full. And we deal with all of those risks to a greater or lesser extent. The person in this household with this picture was in a wheelchair and couldn't actually turn around in her home, which had a social landlord. I don't know how it got as bad as it had it by the time we got there. But yeah, we're always looking for what are the key risks that are limiting somebody's well-being. There are all sorts of benefits to engaging a hoarding specialist when it gets that full. So this is a room that you saw earlier. This is the lady's house. It's now even better than that. Gradually starting to make it safe so she could sleep in her bed. Makes me very happy when that happens. Mrs. B, when we arrived, she hadn't touched upstairs for 5 years since her husband died, and her daughter had died a couple of years before that. Very tragic. Untouched and probably quite full to start with. And the long and short of it is, with building her trust downstairs with a couple of projects, she was sleeping in an armchair. She's a lady that has dialysis, 3 times a week, not accepting any other help. As long as we kept to agreed parameters upstairs, she let us take out 35 bags of clothes from upstairs without her being involved, so to speak. This was during the lockdown. And we set up a bed that was like a tribute to her daughter. So it had a football strip on there, her favourite football team, her favourite bears. And then her bed, I set her up with a new mattress, repaired her bed. And I remember going to see her the day after she'd made it up the stairs to go and sleep upstairs. First time in a bed in over 5 years. And I said, how was it for you? She said, it was absolutely lovely. And that's what we do. That is what we do in those homes, is listen to people, keep them positive, keep them forward looking, completely understand that their circumstances are so unique and we can't imagine what it's like, and try and make those changes. So there's loads of points there about the sort of practical things we do.